Welcoming Monisha Rajesh for the next talk on the sleeper hit and the return of the night train. One has heard about the book, if I'm not wrong, and this is a very interesting talk that's going to take place. And the moderator for the session is Mr. Joydeep Datta. Mr. Joydeep Datta combines academia with real enthusiasm. While he teaches optimization, probability, and statistics at the Indian Institute of Technology, one of the premier engineering institutes in the country, he is also an avid rail fan and a collector of scale models. He is deeply in love with the WDM2 class of locomotives and boasts of a working layout of the DHR with Siliguri Junction as the key station. He had co authored a book on the WDM2 locomotive some years back and is now updating it. He is also a railway child and lived his early life amongst trains. So, over to you, Mr. Joydeep, Dr. Joydeep, rather, and we'll take on from there.
Thank you, Manoj. It is a great pleasure to welcome Monisha and also introduce her. Being a YouTuber myself, I'll also keep on showing her books as I read what she has sent. Um, Monisha Rajesh she's already a well-known name here. Is a award-winning British journalist and a best-selling author. Her first book, Around India in 80 Trains, which looks like this, was named one of the Independent's best book on India. Her second book, Around the World in 80 Trains, which is this, uh, uh, that won the National Geographic Traveller Book of the Year and short the Stanford Dolman Travel Book of the Year award. Latest book, Moonlight Express, which is this one, which is I strongly recommend a must read for any train lover. Uh, is currently shortlisted for the Edward Stanford Travel Book of the Year. Rajesh is the contributing editor to the Traveller and writes for The Guardian, the Financial Times, Travel Plus Leisure, and Wall Street Journal. In 2023, she was named the Condé Nast Travelers Travel Woman Who Travel Power List. Welcome, Monisha, and we are all looking forward to your talk. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Joydeep. It's a real pleasure to be doing this. I say good morning to everybody because I'm in London, but good afternoon to everybody in India and wherever you all are around the world. I've decided to take a slightly different approach to this, so I suggest if you've got time, get yourself a cup of tea or coffee because I'm going to approach this from more of a storytelling angle because that's what I do. I'm a storyteller, and I thought it might be fun for you to just sit back and listen to me talk to you about the stories of the trains. As you mentioned, I am talking about night trains, and what my talk will be is in two different parts. I'm going to start out by explaining to you why I actually decided to spend the last 4 years I suppose, exploring, discovering the renaissance in sleeper trains around Europe in particular. Even though my book, Moonlight Express, does include another chapter on India where I revisited. There's a chapter in Peru and also a chapter on the Doğu Express, which runs from Ankara to Kars in eastern Turkey. But second half of my talk, I'm going to actually read you a segment on one of the only two sleeper trains that we have in the UK. And so I hope you'll sit back and enjoy. So, leaning towards the window, I cupped my hands against the glass and I stared out into the darkness. It was early March, but the scenes flitting by were filled with festive cheer. The eaves of every other roof were strung with golden lights, hedges were lit up, and along the swept-up pavement snow was packed into peaks. As the train rumbled along the edge of a village, I noticed a single star glowing on almost every porch. I then caught the eye of the passenger sitting across from me, observing the same. "We sometimes hang stars, even when it's not Advent," he said. "It keeps it, I suppose, cheerful in the long hours of darkness." He said this as though he was reading my mind. Absorbing that little nugget, I turned away from the darkness, drawn back towards the lights and the warm fold of the dining car, where tables of strangers were laughing, topping up plastic cups of Alsace wine and sharing strips of sweet gravlax. The aroma from my reindeer stew was rising off the piping hot plate, and I tucked into the richly smoked meat, mash, and lingonberry jam, thinking about the Swedish verb musa that I'd learned that morning. Similar to the Danish word huga, it meant a warm environment of contentment. And if any word could sum up the feeling of sitting in a sleeper train dining car, then that one came pretty close. I was on board the Norland night train from Stockholm to Narvik, a 19-hour ride that begins in the Swedish capital. Just after 6 p.m., the train was nicely packed out with Swedes who were mostly on their way up to the city of Kiruna to go hiking, ice fishing, and cross-country skiing. The train offering far more storage than a plane for all their gear. A handful of these passengers were commuting to the suburbs or were students travelling home to see family. The passenger opposite me, however, was a venture capitalist from Stockholm who was on his way to the village of Jukkasjärvi for a stag weekend at the Ice Hotel. While feverishly typing on his phone, Carl told me that the rest of his party had taken the 90-minute flight to Kiruna. And much to their bemusement, he would arrive the following morning only at 11, and from what I could tell, their group chat was blowing up with emojis and GIFs, making fun of his choice of transport. I have little vacation and I like to travel slowly, Carl said, in between sips of ice-cold cider. With the frankness so unique to train travel, he confessed to me that he was worried about a reshuffle at work, potentially losing his job, and that he needed the slowness and the calm of the journey to stare into the snow and think. The remainder of passengers on board were largely tourists, and they were staying on board to witness the grand finale at noon the next day, when the train travels over the Swedish border and along the cliff-top of Foten line towards the terminus at Narvik, the northernmost passenger railway station in Europe, known for the magnificence of its surrounding fjord and also its horrifying naval history. In 1940, the Germans had invaded these ice-free waters, flowing in from the Gulf Stream. And although the Norwegians had put up admirable resistance, they were overpowered, and the waters were now filled with shipwrecks. It was into this final group of travellers that I fell, eager to cross into the Arctic Circle, which appeared in my imagination like the Twilight Zone or Narnia, a place of magical darkness and midnight sun that defied all expectation and belief. And how blissful that I could travel there by train, gathering as we thumped up the backbone of Sweden a sense of time and space, witnessing the joints and hinges of this land of more than 260,000 islands. This was in 2023, and over the previous year, I had been riding around Europe, documenting the resurgence of sleeper trains. Responsible for bringing romance to the world's railways, sleeper trains arrived in Europe towards the end of the 19th century, after the pioneering American industrialist George Pullman founded the Pullman Palace Car Company in the US in 1867. Pullman's sleeper carriages set the bar for decadence and indulgent design, with their polished wooden furniture, velvet upholstery, and iconic table lamps. These cars were equipped with dining rooms and even smoking parlors, bringing a real feel of glamour to the rails. Soon after, on observing how they had revolutionized railroad travel, a Belgian businessman and engineer, George Nagelmakers, introduced a handful of similar cars in Europe before founding the Compagnie Internationale des Wagons-Lits in 1876. Nagelmakers established himself as the leading operator of European sleepers, and in 1883 he launched arguably the world's most famous train, the Express d'Orient. 8 years later, it was officially renamed the Orient Express. Now, contrary to popular belief, the Orient Express was never a standalone luxury train, but a regular commuter service that for the first 6 years took travellers between Paris and what was then Constantinople, now Istanbul, on multiple trains and ferries using several sets of rolling stock. Trains departed Paris for Vienna via Strasbourg and Munich, then connected through Budapest and Bucharest to the Romanian city of Giurgiu. From there, passengers took a ferry across the Danube to the Bulgarian city of Ruse, where they were to board a final train to Varna on the Black Sea coast, finishing the journey by steamer to Istanbul. While a decadent version of this service is now rebranded by Belmond and run by a private company, popular with honeymooners, very wealthy tourists, and families celebrating Grandma's 80th, the regular sleeper trains, so reminiscent of interrailing in the 70s and 80s, began their demise in 2014. Within a year or so, they were all but shunted off into the sheds in favour of high-speed trains and budget airlines. Only Austria's state railways, OBB, appeared keen to keep the sleeper train dream alive. When Germany scrapped its sleepers at the end of 2016, OBB bought up Deutsche Bahn's entire rolling stock with a view to repurposing the carriages and expanding its own nightjet network. The company believed that there was still a market for climate-friendly travel that maintained important cross-border connections and leading to an all-round more enjoyable journey. For the most part, though, sleeper trains were beginning to seem like a relic of the railways. And then lockdown hit. Suddenly, travellers were forced to confront the truth about the climate crisis, and many began to question how they were choosing to move through the world. Were fly and flop holidays really necessary when we all had our own beautiful backyards to explore? Slow travel came back into play, with emphasis placed on experiences, engagement with local people, and exploration of locations closer to home. Like my fellow passenger Carl, many travellers wanted the physical slowness that allowed for mindfulness and calm. And what better way to do that than by train? To my mind, trains have always embodied the essence of slow travel. And around the same time that lockdown was relaxed, private companies began to pop up with proposals to shake sleeper trains out of their slumber. A Belgian-Dutch collective named European Sleeper proposed plans for the Good Night train from Brussels to Berlin. A French startup named Midnight Trains aimed to bring about a hotel on wheels that would operate to cities within 800 and 1,500 kilometers of Paris. And OBB announced plans to launch a brand new fleet of purpose-built sleeper trains to complement its already existing nightjet services, which operate on 20 routes around Europe. Suddenly, there was hope on the horizon, and a new dawn for night trains and all the nostalgia that comes with it. The idea of a European sleeper train renaissance was thrilling to me. I'd spent the previous 12 years travelling around the world by train, having some of my most treasured experiences on overnight journeys in India, China, Thailand, Canada, the US, bookended by the most glorious of sunsets and sunrises that almost seemed to ride alongside. Boarding a sleeper train reset my brain and my body. Setting foot on the steps, I was already adjusted to what would be a long and drawn-out adventure, with a sense of unhurried pleasure. There was no fear that I might fall asleep and miss my stop, or that I would have to kill time by watching a film or doom scrolling on my phone. I knew that my only job was to make myself comfortable and settle in for a very long and languorous night, during which I could try fresh local dishes in the dining cars, cross borders with ease, and marvel at the wild and wonderful scenery, cozy in my berth, and usually with fabulous company to boot, but not always. A sustainable, more enjoyable experience allowing me to save on hotels was a tantalizing prospect. But I was curious how this would unfold in practical terms across Europe, where rolling stock is limited at best, and with nobody offering to step up and produce it en masse. There was also the challenge of politics, border rules, and track capacity. Skeptical about how these companies were going to deliver, but willing them to succeed, I set off around Europe, booking tickets as soon as the new routes were ready, nervously waiting for others to appear. Now, as I looked around the dining car, watching passengers in base layers and boots chat to one another, it almost appeared as though this journey was the whole purpose of their travels. Music was playing through a pair of portable speakers. Advice on where best to ski was being swapped, and the whole community just felt much like a family, with each person drawing the other in with a sense of ease, understanding, and trust that's so unique to railway travel. The train carrying these passengers from one destination to another was almost like a footnote in their story, and as I made notes in my diary, I was offered a slice of cheese by one of the 4 other passengers sleeping in my mixed couchette. Colin and Ema were an American couple who just got engaged, and they were traveling up to Kiruna to ride snowmobiles and celebrate their impending nuptials. "I don't want to alarm you or anything," said Colin, carefully rewrapping the packet, "but the other couple in our couchette are kind of sketchy." "In what way?" I asked him. "So they've locked the compartment with all of our stuff inside, and they're not opening the door." Ema shrugged. But alarmed at the prospect of sleeping in the dining car all night, I followed Colin to see for myself. We walked through the standard carriage where passengers would sleep upright all night, their shoes off, damp sock marks on the windows, and hoodies pulled right over their heads. They were watching phones, eating pizza, or lying face down on the tables as we swayed through, checking the number on the next carriage along. Are you sure? I asked. We're definitely in 15, and I think this is 14. Totally sure, Colin replied, with much less conviction in his voice this time. We came to a compartment where the curtains were drawn and the doors were locked. It won't open, Colin said, tugging at the door and turning pink in his cheeks with panic. Keep walking, I said, nudging him up the aisle and along to the next carriage, where we found our compartment with the door open, the curtain tied back, and the woman lying in the top berth playing Minecraft on an iPad. Hey, said Colin, pretending to forage in his bag for nothing, then slinking out and collapsing in peals of laughter. Together we staggered around the vestibule, giggling at his foolishness, and forming an instant friendship. It's the kind of friendship that only forges between strangers on a train. That night, 5 of us shared a compartment, my couchette the one at the bottom. It's always my favourite place to sleep because it allows me to slip in and out of the door without clambering around other people, but most importantly, it gives me prime position when it comes to scanning the landscape while everybody else is fast asleep. For as long as I like, I can hold back the curtain, watching the silhouettes of trees against the moonlight, shreds of cloud crossing its path, and fistfuls of houses passing in a flash. Their lights are often on, and I would inspect them, scouring the walls for paintings, the window ledges for cacti, and the kitchens where residents would still be washing dishes, oblivious to my hungry gaze. Only when we thundered into the countryside, and I was sure that there was nothing left to see but the blankness of space, would I give up and turn in for the night. Over the next year, I was heartened to see that those private companies were showing signs of success. Although bumpy at first in more ways than one, European Sleeper did launch its inaugural route from Brussels to Berlin, and soon extended it to Dresden and Prague. 2 months after my Sweden trip, I was one of the first riders on board, and I was charmed by the knackered old rolling stock and the mishmash of 1970s carriages, clattering between Antwerp and Amsterdam on our way to Germany. It was raucous on board, passengers crammed into the corridors in the low evening light, orange beams sweeping across their delighted faces as we thumped through the fields, watching windmills turn silently in the foreground, the sunset colouring the canals peach and pink. The berths were comfy, the couchettes less so, and the toilets questionable at best. But the overriding feeling I got from talking to passengers was that no one really minded. They cracked open the train's own brand beer, munched a handful of crisps, and shrugged, admitting that they were here for the fun and to hang out with their friends, both old and new. There was something else notable about these trains. Whenever I got chatting to my fellow passengers, I'd find fathers on bonding trips with their sons, daughters with elderly mothers, or old friends who hadn't met up for years. A certain quality about sleeper trains lent itself readily to rekindling friendships, fixing old fissures in relationships, and allowing for feelings to come to the surface. And I soon realized that it was the physical space, the cramped confines that brought people so physically close together, lying above and below each other, listening to snores, sniffs, and sighs. Body language is very easy to read when you're together in these spaces, and it didn't take long to nudge conversation, pull a thread, and turn the compartment into a counseling session or a confession box. I too found myself beginning a friendship with my own daughter, who was about to turn 5 at the time. We had travelled overland from London to Milan over the Easter holiday, and she was very much enjoying not having to share me with her younger sister. Together with her godfather, we had spent a couple of days in Venice, painting masks, eating bigoli, and watching glassmakers in Murano, before we took the sleeper down to Rome. Then it was just the 2 of us on the intercity notte from Rome to Palermo. In our private 2-person compartment, we knelt at the foot of the berth, eating chocolate Grisby biscuits and watching the Italian capital twinkling through the blackness. Is there really anything to see? I'm often asked of my many sleeper trains. And of course the answer is always yes. You just have to look harder. You have to put in a little time and effort to scrape through the darkness and find the late-night workers unloading trucks behind supermarkets, the office cleaners vacuuming around empty desks, the waitress stacking chairs in a restaurant and undoing her hair. I always find it very humbling to witness the nocturnal population working to keep our daily life amenable. Dog walkers would spot us watching, raising a hand in greeting, and smokers on balconies would suddenly lock eyes for a second before we vanished. But it was the small hours on this train that brought the biggest treat. One of the last trains in the world to employ this absolutely wonderful method, the Intercity Notte arrives at Villa San Giovanni, and its carriages are uncoupled and shunted side by side onto a ferry to cross the Strait of Messina. At 6 a.m., I was woken by a series of gentle thumps and found a pair of legs in pink pajamas sliding down the ladder from the upper berth. "Are we on the ferry yet?" asked my daughter, who probably hadn't slept the whole night in anticipation of this marvelous moment. Glancing outside, just as the sky was breaking open, I realized that we were indeed being loaded onto the ferry, and we pulled jackets over our pajamas and hopped down and went up to the deck to enjoy fresh air and the views of Sicily in the pre-dawn light. During the 20-minute crossing, I held hands with this little person who was highly tickled to look down and see a confused passenger peek up from behind a curtain, and I realized that she was no longer just my daughter, but now my little travel buddy, thanks to the quirks of these lovely sleeper trains and the time they were gifting us both. Towards the end of that same year, Nightjet launched its long-awaited fleet of brand new trains. The inaugural route was between Vienna and Hamburg, and I made sure to book myself a weekend round trip to try out the fancy-looking Comfort Plus compartment, which had very alluring photos of pre-made bunk beds, a seating area, and an ensuite shower room. But it was the mini cabins with their cocoon concept that truly piqued my interest. Likened to Japanese capsule hotels, these train compartments had been designed to allow for complete privacy, with doors that pulled closed around the berth. A claustrophobic's nightmare, perhaps, but the setup was still intriguing, and together with a friend I boarded the slick-looking train one spring evening in Vienna. Within moments it was on the move, and I was left facing down what looked like a strip of wooden lockers. Unsure how many others were already concealed inside, we set about tidying away bags and shoes into individual smaller lockers, then used a keycard to open our compartments and climb in. At just under 6 foot, my friend was reaching the maximum capacity of comfort before she discovered, to her delight, a little hatch between our berths. Pulling it open, she reached out to grab me to prove a point, and soon emptied her bag, which was stacked with bottles of cider, cans of lager, grapes, cheese, and crisps, and made a picnic between us as the train whispered along. Beneath us was a young woman travelling by herself, who had pulled on a fleece tracksuit, popped in a pair of AirPods, and disappeared inside her compartment like a snail. She nodded politely before drawing the door around her. While the setup didn't suit me personally, as someone who likes chatting to everybody around me, I could see how it could definitely appeal to commuters and solo women travellers who wanted the peace and privacy. According to my friend, it was much like sleeping in a bread bin, and as much as this was evidently user-friendly and purpose-driven, it was far from the romantic sleeper train experience that I was still yearning for. For 4 years, I've been train hopping around Europe, willing this new golden age of travel of sleeper trains to arrive. But the truth is that the Renaissance has faced many stops and starts, with beloved routes being axed owing to funding cuts and low profits. Midnight Trains, for all its ambition, eventually admitted defeat, and they abandoned their project mid-2024. But on the positive side, European Sloop has been doing really well, and new routes have popped up as they propose to pick up the lost Paris to Berlin line, and they're also starting a new route from Amsterdam to Milan. There's a litany of new luxury trains on the way too, but as we mentioned in the previous talk, they somehow feel a bit like frauds, interlopers in a space that calls out for the nostalgia of dusty couchettes, windows that won't budge, and the smell of burning brakes, not to mention a lower cost. Because for me, therein lies the true romance of the railways. It is impossible to predict the future of travel, but I think that sleeper trains spell a certain kind of magic, and I know that they will prevail in one form or another, clattering through the darkness and carrying us through to sunrise. Now, for the second part of my talk, I'm going to read a small segment of my chapter on the Caledonian Sleeper. Some of you may have taken it. It's one of the oldest sleeper trains in the UK that runs from London Euston up to Edinburgh and Glasgow. And depending on which service you take, the Lowlander or the Highlander, it continues on to Inverness. And it's quite an extraordinary journey. So, the Caledonian Sleeper. On a Friday evening in London, there is nowhere more terrifying than the concourse at Euston Station. It's a place to observe the human nervous system on the brink of mass malfunction. No one arrives at Euston in a good mood. The expectation of delays, cancellations, or an overcrowded service causes heart rates to soar on the approach past Pret and Itsu. Inside, there's a crowd, always a crowd, staring at overhead screens, like a trading floor from the 1980s. No one blinks in case the platform appears and a millisecond is lost in bolting to the trains. You can hear the ticking of brains mapping out the quickest route. You can smell the pheromones of fear, white knuckles tightening on bag handles. Then the number appears and the front line sweeps forward like a scene from Squid Game, commuters sprinting to get on board. In 1837, Euston was the first mainline station to open in London. A few days before the inauguration of the line that would eventually run up to Birmingham, the company directors took a party of friends on a test run to Boxmoor and back. On the return leg, the train had reached the back of Euston Station when the brakes failed and the carriages hit the barrier wall, causing a number of passengers to suffer broken noses and sprained wrists, while others lost their front teeth. It was a prophecy for a station that modern-day commuters now describe as a petri dish of chaos and one of the 9 circles of hell. Throughout my 20s, I'd endured the Euston dash when travelling up to see my parents in Birmingham, but I gave it all up once I'd had children. One summer evening in June was all it took. Laden like a pack horse, I tried very hard to steer a buggy with one hand as my kindly fellow Londoners shoved past, clipping the front wheels and knocking bags off my shoulders. The electronic seat reservations were down, and I'd been left standing for the duration of the journey, a newborn in my arms. Overnight, I abandoned Virgin trains for the Chiltern line, and from then on, travelled in relative peace, enjoying the mild-mannered charms of Marylebone Station. Now, I barely recognised Euston. It was 10:30 on a Tuesday night in April, and all I could hear was the squeak of my trainers as I crossed the concourse. A fraught woman with bad teeth shook a Burger King cup at me, charging off and muttering obscenities before I had the chance to fish into my pockets for change. Propped up against the wall, a couple swigged from cans of M&S gin and tonic, and then I smelt it. The station piss, rivaled only by the stench of car park stairwells. Oh yes, this was very much the same old station. To my relief, I saw the teal-grey train already parked at platform 1. The blinds were pulled down and the windows tinted. So at odds with the grime of its surroundings, the Caledonian Sleeper appeared to have shimmered into being, like a TARDIS. One of only 3 night trains in the UK, the Lowlander service departed Euston a little before midnight and would arrive into Edinburgh Waverley at 7:30 the following morning. The Highlander service split at Edinburgh, continuing to Aberdeen, Fort William, and Inverness. My mum was waiting for me in Edinburgh. She was turning 70, and I had organised a surprise birthday treat for her, asking only that she meet me at the station. For the sake of research, I'd coughed up an eye-watering £345 for a double room. At almost 10 times the cost of the hour-long flight, I was intrigued as to who bought up these spots. Most sleeper train travellers argued that they were saving on the cost of a hotel, but a flight plus a night at the Travelodge was still cheaper than this fare. For all my grumblings, I was permitted to board an hour before the plebs in seated coaches, where tickets were £50 a pop. In addition, I had access to the station's guest lounge, where I could find snacks and shower. No money in the world could persuade me to strip naked at Euston Station, and I was eager to hop on board for a long-awaited hot dinner. The conductor scanned my ticket and handed me a key card. And at once, I felt the flush of excitement of stepping into a world that would soon be sweeping up the country through the darkness, a moving mini-city of sorts, its residents curled up in bed or nursing a nightcap. I'd ridden the Caledonian Sleeper before, but only in its former guise. In 2019, at 7 months pregnant and unable to fly, I travelled from Glasgow to London, a month before operator Serco had rolled out an upgraded fleet of carriages, a year behind schedule. At the time of booking, I'd hoped for fancy compartments with plush bunks and Wi-Fi, but instead, I'd arrived to find the same shabby old train, its walls carpeted with what looked like blue duffel, and the light just bright enough to make out my disappointed face in the mirror. I'd lain awake for most of the night, grateful for the extra added centre of gravity holding me in place as the train braked and jerked, tipping me out pale and exhausted into London's thin first light, prepped for premature labour. Soon after, Serco's inaugural train made its journey from London up to Glasgow, with the Guardian newspaper reporting that the historic journey had struggled to stay on the rails thanks to booking mix-ups, water leaks into cabins, and a delayed driver. Despite being short of berths, a basic requirement of a sleeper service, passengers had rather generously put the chaos down to teething problems. When taking British trains, it's best to expect the worst and then some. But tonight, I was willing with all my fibre to be impressed by this recent incarnation of the Anglo-Scottish sleeper service, which dated back to 1873. I climbed aboard and turned down the corridor, my carry-on bag wedging between its walls. Barely the width from my elbow to fingertips, the bag was stuck fast, and I couldn't believe how tiny the space was. A large suitcase would never fit, nor for that matter would a large passenger. With a two-handed tug, I managed to pull out my bag and locate my room, which was mostly taken up by the double bed. A leather band ran around the walls, which were carpeted again, but with natty Sherlock Holmes-style tweed this time. Eye masks lay on the covers, along with an organza bag of Aran toiletries. The ensuite had a loo that folded down to create a shower area, and I knew, at one glance, that I'd not be putting bare soles on a floor that had all the allure of the footbath at my local leisure centre. That aside, it was a comfy bolt hole, and I was looking forward to slipping under the duvet later. Cranking up the heat, I stepped back out, but my door refused to lock. I looked across to see my neighbour, an American, also wrenching the handle before he waved his card in the air. "I can't lock this damn thing," he said, "but I don't have anything to steal," he added, as he squeezed past me towards the dining car. I shrugged and followed. The aroma of pies and gravy filled the carriage, which resembled a private members' club. To some degree it was, owing to the restrictions and sleeper car passengers only being granted access. These night owls were poring over notes for morning meetings, their suit jackets hung by their sides. Most were on the Glengarioch whiskey, its hue like honey under the light of little lamps. Fittingly, a number of passengers were actually travelling up for a green energy conference, and I realised that those big rooms were mostly taken up for corporate use. I slid onto a banquette and ordered a plate of haggis, neeps, and tatties, which arrived piping hot from the microwave, pooling in whiskey sauce. According to a Scottish writer friend of mine, haggis is primarily eaten around Burns Night, or, as he put it, in bonbons at hipster weddings and tourist restaurants in Edinburgh. He explained that while it was theoretically a year-round dish, only psychopaths eat it in summer. It was spring, but I tucked into the spicy mound of offal and mash all the same. Over dinner, I began to eavesdrop on a young couple who were sitting across the aisle, peering at a plate of toasted sandwiches. "I'm not sure that's what I ordered," said the woman with a Lancashire accent, lifting one with a fork. "Oh, that's annoying," said her partner. "Oh, it's fine. It'll do. I'll have it," said the woman, who I noticed was around 6 months pregnant and probably hungry round the clock. A staff member walked by and I asked if everything was all right. "Yeah, fine, thank you. It's lovely," said the woman, smiling, then shrugging at her partner when he'd gone. Like the passengers happy to write off their awful journey as a result of teething problems, this couple filled me with puzzlement. Why did the British have such reticence about complaining out loud? Stoicism is so hardwired in our psyche that consumers would rather eat the wrong food and go without a bed than voice outrage and risk offence. There is a lot that is mad about the British, but the feverish determination to keep calm and carry on is something that I can't abide. After living in France and watching my colleagues spend more time on strike than at work, I understood how they'd rid themselves of their royals, enjoyed a 35-hour week, and indulged in long, wine-filled lunches while we poked at sandwiches we haven't ordered and sat at low-paid jobs in a sulk. I saw then that we were on the move, and my mood leapt as the station's lights beamed across the carriage. The couple pointed out of the window, and I saw the man squeeze his partner's hand, absent-mindedly turning around her engagement ring. She wrinkled her nose at him as I reached for my book. I always had one on the go, mostly to hide behind while listening to other people's private chats. Over years of gadding about the world's railways, I'd heard people admit to crimes, sob over estranged family members, and recount abusive relationships. One memorable tale emerged on a train from Pyongyang to Beijing from a woman detailing how her boyfriend had thrown her out of their house in Adelaide for having scabies and sent her to prune vineyards on a farm with illegal Chinese migrants. Fortunately, they had been incredibly kind and taken pity on her and helped her get rid of the rash. I got chatting to the couple, named Molly and Simon, and discovered to my dismay that they had no such revelations. It was her first pregnancy, and she was too nervous to leave the UK or fly, deciding that a sleeper train was the safest option. I'd seen numerous pregnant women on sleeper trains, and only when expecting a baby myself had I twigged how reassuring it was to know that help wasn't far away if needed. Wheels on the ground felt infinitely safer than being airborne. Simon had booked a surprise hotel in Edinburgh, and Molly gushed like a young child, talking about the fancy bunk beds in their sleeper compartment. I didn't dare mention the double bed that I had to myself, wondering for a moment if I should offer to swap with them, then deciding that I was mad and far too generous. "There's another one of these trains going down to Cornwall," said Simon. "I'd quite like to do that one, but that's dead expensive." The Night Riviera ran between London Paddington and Penzance. Its name suggested wistful window gazing, something that would deliver a romantic ride, not one that would halt at Reading at 1 a.m., picking up pissed up passengers who fell against my door and rattled at the handles all night. My 5-year-old daughter and I had taken the train the previous autumn. We'd collected complimentary packets of shortbread and chocolate from the kindly staff in the bar car, and she'd climbed up to her silky soft berth, arranging the treats around her pillow, then falling asleep before departure. I'd spent half the night worried that she'd roll out onto the floor, and the other half blocking out the voices jabbering through the walls. But before dawn, I'd drawn up the blind to find mists hovering above the moors, the clouds like puffs of pink steam. A knock at the door brought Del Boy with hot bacon rolls, and together we'd watched waves crashing up the track before arriving into the damp and grey of Cornwall's morning mizzle. For all the fun of the sleeper, the Paddington to Penzance route was best taken during the day. The 19-minute stretch that lay between Exeter St David's and Newton Abbot was one of the railway community's most guarded secrets. Soon after acceleration past terrace houses and car parks, the vast green marshland narrowed to a point. The trees fell away and the train curved around the mile-wide River Exe. To the untrained eye, it appeared like an ocean dotted with kayaks and sailboats. The wetlands teemed with bird life, teals, bar-tailed godwits and avocets picking their way through the sands, like ladies holding up their skirts. Around Dawlish Warren, the Exe joined the English Channel, and a sliver of foam rimmed the water's edges, waves rippling across the shore. Winding down the coast, the train then swung inland once more, then ran up against the River Tean before pulling into Newton Abbot. It was a tragedy to miss it all at night. As we passed Watford, I took myself off to bed, handing Simon a spare packet of earplugs and promising that babies didn't mean the end of travel, just different travel. My neighbour was now apparently in my room, so thin were the walls that his shuffling and sniffing felt like we were sharing a bed. With earplugs in place, I shoved keys, water bottles, and shampoos into my boots and dimmed the light. This did little to mitigate what turned out to be one of the worst night's sleep of my life. From Berkhamsted, the train hummed sweetly to itself, and I dozed off until another train went past with a shoop, 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 sending us thumping to one side. For the next few hours, we were pulled into sidings or held up, freight screaming past the window, until I realized I was never going to find peace. My eyes drier than dust, I lay on my back, counting each one of those 345 pounds in my head before maybe crying myself to sleep. Who knows how I got there? But I woke at 6:30 and scrabbled out of bed and into the corridor. Beams of sunlight wheeled through as the train skimmed the edge of the Cobinshaw Reservoir. It was a bright morning, the Pentland Hills fresh and green, yellow gorse bursting at the edges of the slopes. I imagined its smell, like coconut, the grass lightly filled with dew as we rushed past on the way to Carstairs. At once, all was forgiven. The faulty door, the mucky floor, the jammed bag, the 2 hours' sleep. In my pyjamas, unbothered by others walking to breakfast, I allowed the serenity of the Scottish countryside to take hold and soothe. Over the full Highland breakfast, a full English but with 2 triangles of potato scones, I watched the Clydesdale countryside flit by, trying to ignore the headache at my temples. Only one other passenger was dining, until a plump woman in a badly fitting suit sat down. I nodded and wished her good morning. Well, it might have been, I suppose, but I've not slept, and I've just found out we're going to Edinburgh, and I need to be in Glasgow. She checked both her phones and then laid them down on the table. Hello, lovely to see you again, said the train manager, stopping by to pour coffee. They've put me onto the wrong train, she said with a sarcastic smile. Well, it's still lovely to see you, he replied, winking at me from where I was watching the scene with a mixture of amusement and pity. Glasgow was only an hour from Edinburgh, and whichever minion had fluffed her booking would no doubt be scrambling to order her a cab. At that moment, another member of staff ran through, followed by 2 others. My American neighbour was now stuck inside his room with the door jammed. Handing a knife to his colleagues, the manager went back to wiping down the tables as the others disappeared, presumably to stab open the door. I glanced down at my own key card, which said in silver writing, "Your key to a good night's sleep." This new tech, he said, it's not always that reliable. So I've gathered, I replied, spearing the last chunk of sausage and wiping it around my plate. It never works, he mouthed, drawing a finger across his neck and rolling his eyes to the sky. Arthur had worked on the train for almost 14 years and was far from enthralled to the upgraded fleet. The cost is putting people off, he said as the car emptied. He missed his regulars, the ones who bagged cheap berths at the last minute. It was still popular with politicians, civil servants, and TV presenters, but Arthur had witnessed a complete overhaul in his customers. Tourists and corporate travellers had replaced his faithful riders. 6 months earlier, the Scottish government had announced that Circa would be stripped of the contract early and that the Caledonian sleeper would come back under public ownership, and it remained to be seen how the train would evolve. To my knowledge, only one person had ever slept through the entire night. According to the tabloid papers, Jim Metcalfe, a charity chief executive based in East Renfrewshire, had boarded the train in Glasgow and gone to sleep before it departed to London. At 5 a.m., there was a knock at his door, and he woke up to a man with a coffee and sausage sandwich who kindly informed him that they were still on the platform at Glasgow after a heat wave had caused the tracks to buckle, leading to the train being cancelled. We arrived into Edinburgh, and Arthur warned me that unless I wanted to end up shunted into the shed as the train decoupled, I'd better disembark. I thanked him, handing him a tenner after learning from a fellow passenger that none of the credit card tips went to the staff, and I jumped onto the platform, ever dismayed by Big Corp's capacity to swindle. Behind me, the train rolled away, and I turned to face old Riki. It was 7:30 a.m., and my mum wouldn't be with me for a couple of hours, which was perfect, as I had lined up a wee rendezvous. Oddly nervous, I crossed the station and parked my bag, scanning the crowd for my friend. While I was travelling around India in 2010, she and I had got chatting on Twitter. A big fan of Bombay and its roadside dhabas, she and I had swapped tips on keema pav and pani puri, and we'd kept up a friendship online. Then, during lockdown, when a horrible incident had sent me into a spiral, she'd posted a package of tea and a number of vintage train stamps that she'd found in a small shop in Gdansk. Our friendship had shifted to WhatsApp, and now, after more than a decade, we were about to meet. She was taking one of the Lumo trains to London, which gave us barely half an hour for coffee. However, neither of us knew when we might cross paths again, and our corresponding timetables felt like kismet. I saw her before she saw me. Her hair was a shade darker than I'd expected, her voice deeper, her accent less posh, but the warmth was the same. In the middle of the station, we embraced, 13 years of friendship compressed between us, as passengers hurried around us and trains came and went. Well, thank you all for listening to that final segment of my book. And I would be very glad to answer any questions. I haven't looked at the chat. I can see that there are 18 comments. I hope there's some questions in there.
Yeah, there is. I guess many of us were romancing our own memories about night trains, and India is all about night trains. So I'll read the comments here, which are very, very nice. I'd say Mr. Hemant Kumar writes, "Lovely train travel from the point of view of a storyteller, looking for the little mundane things that only a keen observer would notice. Most travelers flop in sleep, get up, and are gone. Uh, each one has a story which only a storyteller is able to elicit. Well done. Looking forward to reading our books. God bless you." Then
Thank
Sirish
you.
Paranjape writes, "I have traveled overnight in Europe only once from Hamburg, 9 p.m. Lyon Lyon via and with change of train at Basel. 10 years later, it remains a memorable trip which I will happily repeat anywhere in Europe." JL Singh, who is our secretary who contacted you first, in 1986, I traveled from Paris to London by train. The journey was overnight and split into three parts: train to Calais, ship across the Channel, and then to London, Victoria. This is the only night journey I've done in Europe. What great writer, Sushma says, what great writer as well as communicator. One can picture the whole journey. Shirish Paranjape says, power of observation, ability to connect, and those in the story and the diction style to support the storytelling. What else one does need? Vinu Mathur, our president of the Railway Enthusiast Society, says a brilliant presentation, engrossing and enjoyable. Manoj Pandey, who is he's conducting the whole ceremony today, and our member. Excellent and engrossing narration, a writer, sharp observation, and tongue-in-cheek comments. Apurva Bahadur says Monisha has such evocative and imaginative language, a treat to listen to the book reading. Atulya Sinha, who is an ex-railway man and our member, says, I have read Monisha's first two books, but not the one about night trains. I am going to order it today. Shirish Paranjape again says, for GPB 345, Monisha got this vivid experience and we are fortunate to listen it for free. Keep writing and sharing, Monisha. GK Divedi says, travel stories from Monisha are a real treat from a railway enthusiast. Thanks, Monisha. I greatly enjoyed it. Warren Miller says, that's the last comment. So maybe I'll have a small question to ask you.
Yes, of course.
So you travel by Shalimar Express
I
in
did. Yes.
chapter 13 of your book.
Yes.
Uh, so you write that in 2010 you lost your heart to the Indian Railways.
Yeah.
So do you think that Indian Railways has some influence on your life as a rail travel writer and a writer in general of on travel things?
Oh my gosh, completely. I mean, there is no way that I would be doing what I'm still doing 16 years later if it wasn't for that 4 month journey. In fact, I just came back from India. I took my children there for the first time ever. They're 8 and 6 now. And we just did a trip from Bombay. We actually took the Maharaja's Express train, which I've never done
Oh,
before. I've never taken it.
there was a big talk on the Maharaja Express.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I mean, it's an extraordinary journey. Also, quite comical for my children to take it because I said, please don't expect Indian Railways to be like this every time you come back to India. But it was a nice way for them to understand, various ports of call from Bombay, Udaipur, Jaipur, Bikaner. They got a little sample of everything, and then the Taj Mahal as well. But Indian Railways has completely and utterly shaped my career, my entire life, my outlook, the way I speak to people, my relationships. I even met the photographer who I work with now, who is half Welsh, half Indian, grew up in Scotland, and lives in Hackney. I met him on a train in Madhya Pradesh in April 2010. He was on the Lifeline Express volunteering and taking pictures while I went there to write. And we made friends. And even now, he still accompanies me on my journeys. And I sort of hold Indian Railways responsible for all of that. So many of
Oh,
the completely. Indian Railways is. I still come back to it because even though I spent 8 months traveling around the world by train, I still feel like Indian Railways has a soul, and there's just something about it that is just unrivaled. It really is. It's got magic. It's got the dynamics of the different classes, the different types of trains. And in fact, when I was in Jaipur for the Literature Festival in January, and I took the Vande Bharat back to Delhi, the first time I've ever done it, and it was fantastic. I had so much space. It was on time. It was comfortable. It was clean, and I could just see how much the railways have evolved since I first travelled around in 2010. I know when I wrote the Shalimar Express chapter, I was on one of the oldest, most battered trains, but the new ones are really quite something. And I think there's is just it's endless what there is to plow in terms of stories as well.
there are more comments coming in. Biraf Mullah says from Bombay, brought back memories of my European train travels in 1980 and 84 when I literally lived in trains.
Oh,
Hemlartha Rao gives a thumbs up, and Gert Marion says, thank you, Monisha. And I also came to know from your talk today that Euston is the oldest terminal in London. So one of
mm,
the things I put as a feather on my enthusiasm is that last year on 27th September, on the 200th anniversary of the railway, that very day, I took a train out of London Euston to Manchester where
oh,
my brother stays.
oh,
So my
wonderful.
younger brother is in UK. So it was a long time dream for me to travel on that very day on in Britain. So I
Yeah.
could take the Elizabeth line and connect to it
Oh,
in
fantastic. Oh,
yeah.
that's a
So
very
that
good
was
route. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So there were excellent comments, and thank you for your comments about Indian Railways. So Caledonian sleepers, have they been now transferred to the ScotRail system? Is the Scottish government handling it now?
Yes, they are, and I haven't been on it. I have to admit, I haven't been on it since then. So I don't know what the situation is like. But I think it's the cost is still prohibitive to so many people who want to actually use the train and would. It's I think that's the problem with trains all over in Europe. From everybody who I've spoken to, not just on sleeper trains, but they just said if the cost was slightly brought down, it would we would immediately give up flying and use the trains
Yeah, the
instead.
cost also prohibited me several times to take the Caledonian sleeper.
Yeah,
So, and another train, because you have written so much about European trains, and another thing which I'm very sad to see them gone, is the Talgo services that took place from which went from France to into Spain.
yes,
They are coming to several other parts of Europe, but it's very those Talgo night services. I
yeah,
remember taking several times from Paris to Barcelona, the Talgo Joan Miro. It was just amazing, kind of.
yeah. They are. In fact, I did. So the train, I think it's actually SNCF, the French state operator, who are making these cuts because they used to. I mean, in fact, the first chapter of Moonlight Express is the Paris to Vienna night jet, and they've now dropped that service as of December last year. They decided to cut
Oh,
the
they
route.
have dropped it?
Yeah, and it's not. I was devastated because it's such a huge connector for people. The beginning of that leg, which takes people
But so,
towards.
so they are not allowing OBB to run the service. The service is run by
No,
OBB, right?
it's OBB, but it's SNCF who are being difficult about it, and so they cut the
They just
line.
want to push the high speed. Okay. Mm.
Yeah, so in fact, European Sleeper have picked that up, and they're going to run the Paris to Paris to Berlin and Paris to Vienna were both cut, which is really sad. But European Sleeper is picking it up, but it's going to go a different route. It's going to go via Brussels. So we'll see what happens
Long
because
back
it's
in
starting at the end of March.
Oh, that's very sad. In
Yeah.
2007, I did by 2007, I guess, if I remember correctly, I did Berlin to Paris by Deutsche Bahn
Okay.
Nachtzug, which is not there, with a group of politicians along with me,
Oh, really?
German politicians. Yeah.
Well, that's the thing.
So in a cushion. Yeah.
Well, that's how the Europeans are very different. Everybody will use the trains, no matter who they are. Politicians will happily take them. Very wealthy people will take them, and I think it's a real signifier of a society when everybody uses the public transport available. That's you've got it working right. And I wish that I think the British problem is tenfold: the cost, whether it works or not. You usually end up on a replacement bus service. It's so poor, but we'll see what happens once it's renationalized. Who knows?
Thank you, Monisha. It's wonderful. If there is any more questions by anyone, I think there are a lot of says again. Shirish Paranjape writes, my observation is that many trains around the world are becoming land version of flight, similar seat meals. Indian trains are different due to the sheer variety from Maharaja Express to second class unreserved seating with train to chai wala and other food coming to every seat. I sincerely hope Indian Railways retain this charm while having Vande Bharat Express and Rajdhani Express.
Mm.
How much, and Apurva Bahadur asks you a question, how much planning is needed for your trips? That's a very important question.
That's a good question. I plan a lot more now than I did before because of having two very small children at school. I can't just take off for 3-4 months at a time like I used to. So every time I go out, it's usually during school holidays. So I have to plan everything very carefully back to back. So I do plan weeks in advance. I make sure. Also, trains do get booked up very quickly, especially in Europe. Around holiday times, you have to get in quickly. You also get cheaper tickets if you plan in advance. But I'm quite rigid with the train bookings. But in terms of where I'm going to move around once I've reached somewhere, I usually give myself 2 to 3 days of freedom and a buffer so that if I get somewhere and decide that I really, really like it and I want to stay for a bit longer, then I can. Otherwise, I might move on again quite rapidly. But it's now I do have to be quite strict about what I'm doing in a way that I really didn't before. When I wrote Around the World in 80 Trains, I made sure that I booked the really big sort of joints in the journey. So the Trans-Mongolian, I booked the Canadian, I booked I did 6 weeks on Amtrak, so I made sure I booked all of those because anything that I needed a sleeper for, I made sure that was all booked up because they go first. But otherwise, I like to keep things quite free because it's that sort of spontaneity and that haphazard nature of travel that often brought out the best stories for me. Especially in India, where I'd get on board a train and I'd say, "This is where I'm going," and then someone would say, "Oh my gosh, you're not going to get off at this place. It's got this temple. It's got this wonderful food. You've also got this view." And then I would immediately think, "Oh, okay, maybe I'm going to change my trip." And it's often passengers who shape my journeys and tell me not to stay in a certain place and try this, hotel instead. And it's the fun of it. That really is the essence of slow travel, when you are very much embracing the surroundings, the people, the local people who work better than guidebooks. They are around you, giving you much more up-to-date, valid information from experience. So, and I think that's very unique to train travel. I don't think you really find that anywhere else.
Thank you, Monisha. We end with Bharat Bhora's comment. He says, Monisha, big fan of your work. Just finished reading Moonlight Express. It seems this is a big Moonlight Express. Thank you, Monisha.
I would like to end with a comment. Monisha, obviously, Dr. Joydeep Dutta is a great fan of yours. When we were trying to draw up a list of possible speakers for this conference, he's the one who suggested your name. And that is when I got in touch with you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. I love it. It's such a joy talking to people who care about trains in the same way, because my friends and family don't. I think they still wonder what it is that I love so much about it. So when I'm sort of with my people, it's always really enjoyable because you all get it. There is just something there that we all know is so lovely about these trains. So it's pleasure. It's a real pleasure to come. Thank you so much for inviting me. It's been really lovely.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you, Monisha, again. I think now I have 3 more books to read.
Oh, thank you.
Never read you, so I'll have 3 more books to read.
Thank you very much. Thank you.